Oh, well, hello there. Welcome back to our conversation about um, fieldwork and how do we conduct it, the things that we got to watch out for, and all the things that go into learning about other cultures and how do we deal with those issues. Okay, so one of the things that we have to understand when we're conducting research is that because we're dealing with people, things are subjective, right? Things are oftentimes reviewed from a certain point of view. So, I might be talking to someone within a community and they're going to give me some information about it. They're going to tell me about some people. They're going to tell me about their family. And then I go talk to someone else and they're going to be like, oh yeah, don't trust that guy. Right? That guy's going to tell you different information, wrong information. And I'm going to talk to someone else and they're going to be like, yeah, don't listen to that guy. And that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Right? Information is subjective. Everything that you hear is subjective. It's from a certain point of view. And one of the things that we oftentimes have to do is take it as truth, right? Not fact. Truth and fact are actually two very different things. A fact is something that is rooted. Everyone can see it. Everyone understands this is how it is. Truth, on the other hand, can be more subjective, right? They might not be lying to you about something, and this is how they see things. This is how they believe things are going, and that can be at conflict with other people. So the information that they give needs to be considered to be subjective. And this is just because this is a point of view. This doesn't make it right or wrong. This is just how people relate to each other. And that's okay, right? We just keep that in mind when we're listening to those folks. And when we get enough information from all of these different people, then we can put together a more holistic view of what that community actually looks like. Because we know that people are very, very dynamic, right? People are flawed, and their memories aren't always great. Again, this doesn't necessarily mean that there's an issue with doing interviews. Some people are going to remember certain things in a certain way. Maybe they've forgotten a bit. Maybe they forget some details. And then someone else comes along and says, oh yeah, but you forgot about this. Or, oh, that's not how I remembered that. I remembered it like that. And all of a sudden, again, you're still dealing with information which is, might be difficult, might be, at opposing ends, might be contradictory, which can be difficult, but not uncommon. So, right, people's perceptions, their personal experiences are going to be different. So we pay attention to that. We also have to consider, and this is kind of an important one and a difficult one sometimes to deal with, is why people are going to share information with you. And this is certainly something that has happened to me personally. When I was working on the Ute Mountain Reservation, we would sometimes be working with certain individuals within the tribe, and these were individuals that were, helped get us there. They came to us and said, "Hey, we've got a problem. We think you guys might be able to fix it." Oftentimes involving manual labor, so we'd go and do it. So here's the thing, right? As an anthropologist, if we're doing field work, we oftentimes bring resources with us, right? Whether it is financial resources, right? Being able to pay for things, being able to fund things, which is oftentimes the case. Maybe it's that labor power where, in our case, in our projects, we had a lot of people that were available to move things, cut down things, whatever kind of labor might be needed, that labor, right, becomes valuable resource. Those funds become valuable resource. So if you've got that access to it, guess what? People are going to want to work with you if they think that they might benefit from it. And in times past, that has been an issue in which you might have that key informant. That key informant is helping you, has been helping you for a while, but comes to the end of their knowledge. Maybe they've shared everything that they can. It is not unheard of that people will make stuff up so that you will stay and will continue to benefit them, right? And this is not an uncommon practice necessarily even in our own culture, right? Where if we see an advantage that we can get, especially one where we're, hey, you got resources and you can really help me out, I'm going to want to keep you around, that becomes an issue. So keeping that in mind when you're working with folks, keeping that in mind when you're talking to someone, how are they benefiting from interacting with you? And how are you benefiting from working with them, right? That is also something you have to keep into consideration. Right, we have been known to pay compensation, right? You come to me, answer my questions, guess what? I'm going to pay you, to show you that I appreciate the things that you have done. It's not uncommon to compensate. So, and that is oftentimes one of the things that we have to take into consideration is that, people are doing this for mutual benefit, right? I'm out there, I'm the researcher, I'm learning all kinds of stuff. You're here, you're helping me, but what am I giving back to you? And that is something that needs to be considered anytime that you get involved in a project. You're benefiting, how are they benefiting? Keep that in mind. So, the motivations of people, right? Let's keep going here. Okay, skills and perspectives. Field work is kind of tough to teach, especially because this is that artistic approach that I was talking about. The art of doing field work, a lot of it comes down to you just going out and doing it. Right? You do the research, you go out there and you talk to the people and you learn how to do it. And I can give you ideas, I can give you things to think about, but until you actually go out and start talking to people, you're not going to learn how to do field research, right? So you have to get out there and do it. How you go out and do it is also really important. One of the things that a good anthropologist usually does is has a very open mind and tries to be unbiased, right? You want to learn something, but you don't want to judge other people while you're doing it. And that can be difficult sometimes, because we are all filled with biases, and bias isn't bad. Bias is not a bad thing. It's how we have learned from early childhood to adults. It's our everyday lives. We believe that there's a certain proper way of doing things. And if that comes into conflict with another culture, well, how do you deal with that? So we try and figure out what those biases are and go into those places with an open mind. You have to be a skilled listener. And in our culture, that is oftentimes difficult, right? When I'm having a conversation with someone, and this happens a lot with men, somebody will say something and it triggers a response and a memory. And I'm like, oh, I've got something I can add to this conversation, something that's really going to benefit this conversation. I think that they should really understand or listen to what I'm about to say. And you start thinking about how you're going to say it, and you've just missed, right, 30 seconds of what they were sharing with you. We are not necessarily trained to be skilled listeners, right? A skilled listener is usually very good about paying attention to what's being said, and when that is done, then responding, but really focusing on the speaker, right? And not wanting to contribute their own ideas, their own thoughts, really paying attention to what is happening at that moment. And that can be difficult, right? That can be really difficult. One of the things you also have to know is that there are certain things that people don't want to talk about or can't talk about given the circumstance, right? Some things might be considered to be taboo. You might be interested in the reproduction within the community, and what are the rules and what are the behaviors that people have. Well, guess what? If you're right out in the middle of public, there's a good chance that people aren't going to tell you anything, or they'll tell you something that they think you want to know. Maybe you haven't gained their trust. And that's really important to think about, is gaining their trust so that the information that they give you is valid, right? Because sometimes you haven't earned the trust to know that kind of information. Maybe they can give you surface level information, basic information, but that deep down kind of information, you have to earn it, right? So you have to earn that respect before they're willing to actually engage in those conversations. Sometimes it's place. Sometimes, you go out to dinner with someone and you start talking to them about something, they're like, I can't talk about it here, right? Maybe you're at work and you're curious about their boss or their coworkers, and they're like, I love my boss, I love my coworkers. And you're like, oh, no, they really don't. I need to get the details on this, but apparently I can't do it at work while their boss and coworkers might be discussing or might be listening in on what's being done, right? So then you would go to another location, and then you can get all the details about that juicy gossip, whatever, right? So sometimes it's the place, sometimes it's the location, sometimes it's the timing. All of these things are things you have to consider. There's a lot of things that you have to consider. And then sometimes it's best to just sit and watch. We're oftentimes taught, especially in this country, that we have to be busy. If we're not busy, we're not working. If we're not working, what is our value? Okay. In anthropology, it is oftentimes best to just sit and observe what people are doing and how they're doing it. Right? What are the reactions and reactions of all the people in that area? What are they doing? And you just make notes about it. You just sit there and you watch and you ponder the behavior. What's going on here? And it helps to do that so that you can gain a little bit of clarity, where you're not talking to folks, you're actually listening and paying attention to their behavior, the things that they're actually doing. So sometimes it's good to be a professional people watcher, right? And just making those observations. Now, one of the things about doing research is there's this process of mutual transformation. When you're working with other people, you are going to be learning from them. They're also going to be learning from you, right? And no matter what happens, there's going to be this exchange of ideas, exchanges of behavior between the people that you're working with. And that's important to understand. Nobody lives in a vacuum. Just by being there, you're going to have an impact on that community, right? If I'm going into a community and I'm working with them, and I bring my financial power, I bring my labor power, I might be able to influence someone's behavior unintentionally. but through their own expectations of what they might be able to benefit from me, right? They might learn something about you, and that might transform their ideas, right? That might challenge some of their preconceived ideas. So all of that comes into play. You will have an impact on their lives, and they will also have an impact on you. And the idea is that we try and do this kind of work without having a negative impact. And that isn't always a case, and it isn't always visible. And that's kind of the tough spot to be in. Anytime we're working within a community, there might be someone that's going to benefit, and there might be someone that isn't going to. How do they feel about that? I'll give you an example. I know when I was working on the Ute Mountain Reservation, we went before Tribal Council, and we were basically asking for permission to come down again for another year. And on that board of people, we usually got approval from everyone except for one person. And this person represented a small part of the reservation called White Mesa. White Mesa was, like, I think 80 miles away, and we rarely had any interaction with White Mesa because of that, because of the distance. But they did not feel like approving our return because they did not benefit from it. They didn't see any benefit from it. We were helping out in this community, but we were not doing anything out there. And because of that, because of, you know, the fact that our circumstances didn't necessarily allow us to go out there, the unintended consequences of not being able to or not doing so created a negative impact towards us, right? Had nothing to do with anything that we did towards them, right? It had to do with the things that we didn't do towards them, right? Something to consider when you're thinking about working with a community. Who's going to benefit, who's not going to benefit, you know, and the actions or inactions that might take place. And it's important to recognize those things. Then we have things like sort of like a code that we live by. Right? It's similar to the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. And that's the intent. Everything that we do, we try and not do harm to another community. And while we're doing that, we also know that there are unintended consequences. If we can avoid those, we will. Doesn't always happen, but we try. And that's the part that we really try and work towards, is not having those issues come up. Then we do an analysis of all that field work, right? We take all of that information, we are constantly reviewing, constantly going back and looking at it. What's changed? What's new? What stayed the same? We look at all of that information and we start to give our analysis. We look at things like the EMIC perspective. Okay, the EMIC perspective is the participant observer, right? Actually talking to, interviewing, discussing, living our daily lives right next to those people and engaging in that daily activity. And then we look at the EDIC perspective, and that EDIC perspective is the overarching view of that community, right? That's that people watching, the sitting there and just observing what everyone's doing without interaction, right? And gaining those perspectives and then comparing them, right? If you watch what's happening, you can see certain levels of behavior. But if you talk to people about that behavior, their responses might differ from what you're actually observing. Why would that be? Right? That's something that would be an interesting question to deal with. And then when you compile all of this data, after you've done your research, you've made all these observations, you've written down your notes, you've done this analysis, and then you can compile it into an ethnography. Right? And that ethnography is the story of that people, right? As best as you can tell it. And this is important to think about when you're doing research. Is that story, right? Whose story are you telling? All right, we're going to pause, and we'll have another section to this, closing out this discussion on fieldwork, and we'll talk about why it's important to think about who's telling the story. Okay, we'll see you in a few.